everybody. This is Rocky.
I'm Harry.
He uses a different name every time. So, as you've seen before, we come up with crazy topics that we either want to debate or understand or talk about with you, understand more from you. And we don't script this, so
unscripted.
You're going to get what you're going to get.
Get what you get.
And today's topic is about job postings.
It's about job postings, right. So, basically, I saw a job posting, but it listed all of the qualifications that they're looking for in the applicant, right? And at the very bottom is something that's unique. It had a statement, and it said, minorities and women often do not apply for jobs unless they meet all of the requirements or 100% of the requirements. Even if you feel you're not qualified, apply anyway, you may be the perfect fit. And I found that interesting. What do you think about that?
I mean, I 100% agree with that statement. That's a good disclaimer or a cautionary statement on there, because as much as employers try, and some try, some don't, honestly, but as much as they do try to use inclusive language to get the best candidates regardless of, what their background is, etc., it's really hard to do that if you're speaking from a position of privilege or you already have that job. You don't realize or recognize that you're using language that excludes people. So I love that they put that disclaimer. It's almost like, hey, we tried, but we want you to apply because we're trying to get the best, not a robot, right?
Right.
And so I really think that was a great thing to put. I would love to see more employers put some language around that, not at the bottom, but at the beginning, right? So it's like, I see the title, yes, something about that title sparked me, or something about the description, that initial description sparked me. Then it needs to tell me, look, the rest of this might be intimidating to you depending on your background. Right. But I want you to just be open-minded, apply anyway, look at it, whatever, Right. So, I mean, what do you think?
I think it was unique, and it really stood out to me that a company would, I feel like that was going above and beyond. So whoever's in the HR who decided to put that there, my hat's off to them, because I really feel like that is something that's needed. And, I'll go on my personal experience. When I was looking for jobs, I always felt that I needed to hit every single checkbox before submitting an application or before reaching out to whoever the hiring manager was. So I 100% agree with that. But I guess the bigger question I'll have for you is, why do you think that is?
Well, for me, I'm thinking about, at least for those that are not in a position of privilege, you are almost brought up to think that you have to be 2 times or more better than, the majority, which is a white male. You do feel like you have to overperform. And at very minimum, if this is the bare minimum list that they're asking for, this is the barrier of entry, and I don't have all 10, all 20, then I'm not 2 times, 3 times as good. So I'm not going to apply. So there's this something about the psychology of it all, even with women, right? You just feel like, if I don't have all of these things or more, there's no way that I'm going to be considered next to my male peers equally. Right. And I don't know if you feel that some way, or feel like that's how we were raised, or.
Yeah, and again, I can only go on personal experience, but I feel like, as a minority, you have, and I'm making this up as we go, but it's kind of like the over-under syndrome. So when you go and you apply for a job, you normally hear, oh, you're overqualified or you're underqualified. And then the reality is that hiring manager or whomever that person is making that decision, they're deciding on it a lot of times not off of any particular metrics. It's just off of a feel and off of who do they vibe with more. So what happens is, if you're not that candidate, and if you're a minority or you're a woman and they're not comfortable bringing you in, you can always default to, okay, there's 15 things on this checklist, you don't have one. And I believe when you get the door slammed in your face over and over and over, you are timid about applying for jobs that you are not 100% qualified for, because you're not confident that you're going to be of consideration. And it's like, it just opens the door for those decision makers to deny you and to reject you. So I think it comes from experience. And I really believe that's the crux of the problem, is rejection is tough, and you don't want to constantly put your neck on the line and constantly get rejected, because that can affect you mentally. So
true.
Yeah.
I've been a hiring manager for over 15 years at this point, and I'm kicking myself because I hadn't thought of including some language like this in my posts. I'm thinking now as you're talking, I'm probably staring off in space, as people probably notice that, because I'm thinking about all the candidates, the excellent candidates I could have missed. I missed just because that statement wasn't there. I've had some bold people who applied anyway, and they probably overachieved in certain areas. So if it says must have a high school degree and they have a master's, that should be weighted in some way against the things that they don't have. And I've had some people who have applied and they, to me, were, quote, overqualified. I didn't turn them down because they were overqualified. Right? We had a hard conversation about, are you really going to stay? And do you feel like you're going to be trying to come for my job every day because you think you're better than me? Right? We had those hard conversations, but at the end of the day, I look at it as if I got a sale. You know, I have my own YouTube channel where I talk about discounts and stuff. There's no way I want to pay full price, even for my talent. Right. And I look at these people who probably otherwise would not have applied because there's some of the things that they don't have, like 5 years experience in XX field, the field that I'm in. Those things can be taught. These people are brilliant. I have people who have been published authors, PhDs, but they don't have XX years of experience in this field. So they kind of like shy away from, like, no, I got a sale, I got a deal. Anyway, that point said, I'm just thinking as you're talking about that, about the talent pool and hiring managers missing out, I'm like, dang, I messed up.
It is. And a lot of times when it comes to overqualified candidates, I look at it in several ways. So when I was in charge of hiring people, I would, especially if it's a lower level job, like for instance, as a coach, I had to hire assistant coaches. I hired young, I hired experienced coaches. And my young coaches, I would always tell them, I'm hiring you knowing I'm going to eventually lose you. And I think that's the sign of a great leader, is when you help develop your labor force, and they can go on if they choose to, and they can be great wherever they go. And then you bring the next person in. And I know it's not necessarily easy to train on that, and I've also had coaches who I felt were way too qualified to coach and teach in a school. And every chance I get, I would present them opportunities. But while they were with me, I would take advantage of their knowledge, of their skill set. I think sometimes when you're in that position and that candidate in front of you is probably more qualified than you, ego comes into play. And you don't want someone who has more credentials than you, who has more credibility than you, because you're probably not confident that you can control that room now. And I think that's a sign of a poor leader. And unfortunately, people are put in positions not based on their ability to lead, but based on their ability to maybe get along with someone, just understand how to play the game. So it's not necessarily the best leader that's in a position who's making those decisions.
That's true. So on the other side of that spectrum, you brought up something pretty interesting about the over part. So should that disclaimer also include, if you feel like you exceed these, you should apply anyway? What do you think?
I think so. I really think so. I think that there is an extra line saying, obviously we tend to slant our thought towards the disenfranchised, or towards the what we think are the lesser. But yeah, there are people who are above that line who may not apply because they don't feel like they'll have a chance either. And I believe everyone deserves a fair opportunity. So, but it comes down to their hiring manager. If you're a strong leader, you can develop people who have deficiencies in a certain area, or you can use the knowledge and experience of someone who has checked all the boxes and more. So I do feel like, yes.
I think it definitely makes the hiring manager have to do the work. Because let me tell you this, I think if you put that line in there, you'll get a ton of overqualified people. Not a ton, but you'll have underqualified and over, right? That all apply in this pool. And for me, it's kind of like, I'm going to make it very, very simple here. If somebody put in front of me Payless, Macy's, Prada, for example, pair of shoes, and it says I have equal choice of all three, I'm going to grab the Prada. The Payless never gets a shot. So now I have to do the work. Just because it's labeled Prada, is it in fact made better than the Payless? Right? I have to inspect. I have to do my work. as the quote hiring manager, I have to do my job and figure it out. Not everybody hiring manager want to do all that. They just want to, on its surface, look at the resume. Can you do this job? Do you tick these boxes? What can you give me?
Right.
Right. Payless has no chance. It's going to be between Macy's and Prada, and then where between Macy's and Prada, ego is what plays into it. Do I feel like I can control Prada?
Right.
Most likely Macy's is going to win, and that wasn't probably the best candidate because they didn't look at all of what each of them brought. Right.
Right.
So I'm curious to know. While I can see the disenfranchised, rounding out the pool and the hiring manager be able to discern, I'm curious to say if we put the other statement in there and say if you're overqualified, apply anyway, how does that impact the hiring decision?
Exactly. And to your point, I think that, everybody likes certain things, right? So like going to your fashion, I'll go with cars. Like you may feel weird driving around the city in a Bugatti, right? But you want a nice, clean Mercedes-Benz, but that Toyota Camry, it may drive better, it's more durable, it's less maintenance, but you're going to go with something that looks good. And what they say, nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM.
I heard the next part of that statement. They just went out of business.
They just went out of business. And you'd rather go out of business by hiring a perceived correct person on paper, and they're not the correct person.
Yeah.
So, but it all plays into, I think it's ego. But again, going back to the main point, when you're a minority and you're a woman, discrimination is real. And these are check marks that can be used against you when you're trying to do better, when you're trying to establish a career. And I don't think it's necessarily fair. This is a start with a company posting this online. It's really encouraging in terms of where we're headed in the labor force. So I was excited to see that.
Yeah, now that I'm aware of that, I write my own job recs. I'm going to include that in my job recs moving forward. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And it was just like this aha moment. And sitting here, I'm serious. You probably I don't know if you see it on my face or not, as we're talking about that. I'm just thinking about how things would have been different, even in my career trajectory, because when you hire and develop the best, it reflects on you personally as a contributor and individual as well. How further along in my career I might have been had I hired different people, right?
Right.
So I'm just thinking about it.
And it needs to be, I think, so the hiring manager in most, mid-sized companies, they're not the top of the food chain. So there needs to be some things put in place to say, okay, this person may have not worked out for reasons other than what you hired them for. But again, going back to that, no one's ever fired for hiring IBM. I can understand how people don't want to put their neck out on the line and hire someone who's underqualified or who's overqualified and unmotivated. I can definitely understand that, but the change really has to start at the top of that company. And that's the only way I believe you're going to see diversity. You're going to have not only diverse in cultures, but diversity in skill set, diversity in viewpoints. Just quickly, speaking of diversity, like something that's always bothered me, I saw a posting, this was a few years ago, with one of the big four consulting firms. And I believe it was an internship or whatever, but it specifically called out 4 universities that those applicants had to be from. And they were all pretty much elite universities. And this is one of the big 4 consulting firms. And, my thought is, how diverse can this consulting firm be if they're only admitting people from these 4 top universities?
Yeah.
There's people at HBCUs who are brilliant. There's people at state universities who are brilliant. And you're going to lower your pool in the name of exclusivity. And it baffles me that there's people out there who still think that way.
Yeah, and there are tons of people who did the junior college and just small college
Yes.
route in general, who are just didn't have the money.
Didn't
have the not that they couldn't go, they just didn't have the money, or chose not to go into debt. Some people choose, like, you know, your local schools.
They were smart.
They were smart
Right,
and
they
chose
were
not
smart.
to go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt for education. And so now they are penalized. They're penalized without not having all the opportunities as those elite schools you mentioned. And now the workforce misses out on that talent. The workforce misses out on that talent. And then and these are some jobs sometimes that are in developmental areas where those bright ideas from those people from not the traditional schools could probably change the trajectory of consumers, from I don't know, technology, everything. It could have changed the trajectory of where we are today, but you decided to go safe.
You decide to play it safe. So as a hiring manager, how do you decide who you're bringing in if you have a bigger pool and you have people underqualified?
Yeah.
Do you set aside certain percentages, like buckets, and say this percentage, that percentage, that percentage, and we're going to bring them in?
Well,
Or how do you do it?
I work for a really big organization today, and it goes through our talent acquisition team first. And they know what the non-negotiables are.
Right.
And they're just a handful of those, right?
Okay.
Whether it be a bachelor's degree or know how to use Excel or something like that. There's some things that we just won't take the time to teach. So some basics. Once you pass that, then they have a conversation with that person to ask them key questions around, well, what type of work have you done? What this, that, and the other. And then if it fits, it fits from then, and they pass it on to the hiring manager. Now, this is where I would come in. So when I have that initial conversation, it's a phone screening or whatever the case may be. You have we have set questions that we ask, so it's apples to apples between all candidates. And what you're looking for is, are they leaders? There's not really a right or wrong answer,
Okay.
but in terms of the candidate, are they leaders? And then there's something you look for in terms of functional fit. And that's more along the things that we're not really willing to teach. So you ask, have you done this before in the past, without asking, have you done this in the past? You ask, like, to tell them an example, ask for an example of when they've done certain things.
Right.
Because there's some key functional things in terms of the role, the fit, that you just cannot stop and train fresh at that level. So if I were in a position where I would bring in an entry level, it would be a different conversation. But you're talking about executive level.
Right.
I can't sit and teach you how to write an email.
Right.
Right. I can't
Right.
sit and teach you how to, do data entry. This
Right.
is not something we have time for.
Right.
So there is a barrier of entry depending on the level of the role. But for entry level, you're really just looking for character. Leadership skills and character.
Got it.
And then everything else you can teach.
Got it. That's what we have. Any more thoughts on the subject?
I don't have any more thoughts. I want to hear what you all have to say. Like, what do you think of that statement? Do you think that should be included in job recs? And then how do you think that would impact the job pool and society in general if you see more of that type of language seen on these job job postings?
So the other thing I'm thinking about doing, let me know. Thinking about just kind of keeping the sides here, more hair here on the sides, So
The George Jefferson.
going into a different phase of life. So,
So
let's
silly.
see.
So silly. All right, thank you so much for watching. We'd love to hear your comments down below. Like the video, subscribe. Wait a minute. Subscribe. You've watched all the way to the end and you haven't subscribed. Subscribe, share it with your friends. We know you like it. We know they'd like it.
And there's more videos like this to come.
Thank you so much for watching. Bye.
Bye.